Welcome back to our Romantic Poets series. In part 1, we explored the nature-rich calm of Wordsworth and the supernatural imagination of Coleridge. Today, in part 2, we move into a more passionate, rebellious, and visionary world shaped by four brilliant poets, Lord Byron, Percy Bysshe Shelley, John Keats, and William Blake. Let's journey through their lives, their masterpieces, their unforgettable lines and the years in which they shaped literature. 1. Lord Byron, the electric rebel of Romanticism. Lord Byron, born in 1788, was the dazzling comet of the Romantic age, handsome, controversial, irresistibly charismatic. He lived loudly, loved fiercely, and died heroically fighting for Greece in 1824. Major works. She Walks in Beauty. A serene lyric from 1814 celebrating a woman's soft, luminous radiance. Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, 1812–1818. A sweeping poetic travelogue capturing the wanderer's emotional exile. Don Juan, 1819–1824. A witty, scandalous mock epic published in installments from 1819. Manfred, 1817. A dark, supernatural verse drama set in the Alps. The Giaour, 1813. A passionate Eastern tale of forbidden love and vengeance. Famous lines. She walks in beauty, like the night. Roll on, thou deep and dark blue ocean. I woke one morn and found myself famous. The mind can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. They never fail who die in a great cause. There is a pleasure in the pathless woods. But words are things, and a small drop of ink. Sorrow is knowledge. The great object of life is sensation. Love will find a way where wolves would fear to prey. 2. Percy Bysshe Shelley, the visionary dreamer. Born in 1792, Shelley believed in freedom, hope, and transformation. His passionate imagination still inspires the world. Major works. Ode to the West Wind, 1819. A roaring invocation to the mighty wind as a destroyer and preserver. To a Skylark, 1820. A lyrical hymn to a bird's pure, ethereal music. Prometheus Unbound, 1820. A visionary lyrical drama ending in triumphant liberation. Adonais, 1821. A majestic elegy for Keats, rich with immortal hope. The Cloud, 1820. A playful poem where the cloud speaks in shifting forms. Queen Mab, 1813. A radical early poem imagining a future free from tyranny. Famous lines. If winter comes, can spring be far behind? O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being. Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought. Rise like lions after slumber. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. The trumpet of a prophecy. O wind! Hail to thee, blithe spirit! I fall upon the thorns of life. I bleed. Life, like a dome of many-colored glass. Not may endure but mutability. 3. John Keats, the poet of beauty and mortality. Born in 1795, Keats lived just 25 years, yet wrote some of the most beautiful poetry ever produced. He believed beauty itself was truth. Major works. Endymion, 1818. A lush romantic epic celebrating beauty and myth. Ode to a Nightingale, 1819. A haunting meditation on mortality and the nightingale's immortal song. Ode on a Grecian urn, 1819. A philosophical reflection contrasting life's brevity with art's eternity. To Autumn, 1819. A flawless celebration of ripeness, warmth, and quiet fading. Ode on Melancholy, 1819. A rich exploration of joy and sorrow intertwined. La Belle Dame sans Merci, 1819. A haunting ballad of enchantment and abandonment. Famous lines. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Beauty is truth, truth beauty. My heart aches, and a drowsy numbness pains. Season of mists and mellow fruitfulness. Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. Do I wake or sleep? Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird. Joy whose hand is ever at his lips. She dwells with beauty, beauty that must die. Love is my religion. For William Blake, the mystic prophet of imagination. Born in 1757, Blake was a visionary poet, painter, and engraver. He created an entire mythic universe. Major works. Songs of Innocence, 1789. Gentle poems of purity and childlike wonder. Songs of Experience, 1794. Darker poems revealing societal oppression. The Tiger, 1794. A fiery meditation on creation and fearful symmetry. London, 1794. A powerful portrayal of urban misery and mind-fogged monocles. The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, 1790-93. A radical fusion of paradox, philosophy, and prophecy. The Prophetic Books, 1790s to 1800s. Mythic works featuring Los, Urizen, and Orc imagination, law, and rebellion. Famous lines. Tiger, tiger, burning bright. To see a world in a grain of sand. Some are born to sweet delight. I wander through each chartered street. The mind-fogged monocles I hear. Little lamb, who made thee? Everything that lives is holy. Energy is eternal delight. Excess of sorrow laughs, excess of joy weeps. He who binds to himself a joy does the winged life destroy. Conclusion. Byron the rebel, Shelley the idealist, Keats the artist of beauty, and Blake the prophet of imagination together shaped the fiery heart of Romanticism. Their works transformed literature with emotion, vision, passion, and defiance. Their words still echo today, powerful, musical, immortal. Now let us explore objective questions. Lord Byron. 1. In which year was Byron born? 1788. Born in London. 2. Who is the author of Childe Harold's Pilgrimage? Lord Byron, published between 1812 to 1818. 3. Which poem begins "She walks in beauty, like the night"? She Walks in Beauty, written in 1814. 4. Which work is Byron's mock epic masterpiece? Don Juan, 17 cantos, unfinished. 5. Who is the hero of Don Juan? Don Juan. Byron reverses the seducer trope. 6. Which verse form does Don Juan use? Ottava rima, 8-line stanza, Italian origin. 7. Which character is central to Manfred? Manfred, a Byronic hero in Alpine setting. 8. Byron fought for which country's independence? Greece. Died at Missolonghi in 1824. 9. Which poem includes the line "Roll on, thou deep and dark blue ocean"? Childe Harold, Famous Sea Address. 10. Who described Byron as mad, bad, and dangerous to know? Lady Caroline Lamb, his ex-lover. 11. Which poem praises a cousin's wife's beauty? She Walks in Beauty, inspired by Anne Wilmot. 12. Byron's autobiographical hero? Harold Travels reflect Byron's own exile. 13. Which narrative poem features forbidden love in the East? The Giaour, part of Byron's Turkish Tales. 14. Name one of Byron's Oriental Tales. The Corsair, published 1814. 15. Who is the protagonist of The Corsair? Conrad, a pirate anti-hero. 16. Which drama features the Doge of Venice? Marino Faliero, historical tragedy. 17. Which poem begins "I want a hero"? Don Juan, opening line. 18. What is the name of Byron's famous clubfoot? Congenital deformity influenced his persona. 19. Who is the heroine in Don Juan Canto I? Donna Julia, early seduction episode. 20. Which poem contains "There is pleasure in the pathless woods"? Childe Harold, Romantic Love of Nature. 21. Which poem is a satire on Wordsworth and Southey? The Vision of Judgment mock heroic critique. 22 What is the theme of darkness? End of the world 1816 Year without a summer. 23 Which work was inspired by the Alps? Manfred Symbol of guilt and sublimity. 24 Byron belonged to which group? Second generation Romantics along with Shelley and Keats. 25 Which sea battle does the Isles of Greece reference? Battle of Marathon Greek patriotic song. 26 What is Byron's real name? George Gordon Byron 6th Baron Byron. 27 Where did Byron die? Missolonghi high fever during Greek War. 28 What animal did Byron keep at Cambridge? A pet bear because dogs were banned. 29 Who was Byron's only legitimate child? Ada Lovelace pioneer of computing. 30 Which narrative poem features Medora? The Corsair Conrad's lover. 31 Which work features the character Leela? The Giaour symbol of innocence. 32 Which poem is a travelogue from Portugal to Greece? Childe Harold semi-autobiographical. 33 Byron's poetic persona? Byronic hero proud, rebellious, doomed. 34 Which poem begins with gloomy apocalyptic imagery? Darkness written after 1816 climate disaster. 35 Which satire mocks classical scholars? English bards and Scotch reviewers written in 1809. 36 Which lake inspired Childe Harold? Lake Leman Byron and Shelley in Geneva. 37 Which poem features Gulnare? The Corsair a courageous heroine. 38 Which drama features supernatural voices? Manfred Spirits and Witch of the Alps. 39 Who was Byron's famous friend and collaborator? Shelley met in Switzerland 1816. 40 Which poem speaks of a cup of trembling? Hebrew melodies inspired by Jewish tradition. 41 Byron's unfinished epic on biblical rebellion? Heaven and Earth a fragment. 42 What form is When We Two Parted? Lyric written about secret affair. 43 Which poem criticizes George III? The Vision of Judgment satirical attack. 44 Byron wrote from exile in which country? Italy from 1816 onward. 45 Which poem features Haiti? Don Juan romantic island episode. 46 Who illustrated many Byron poems later? William Westall 19th century engravings. 47 What does Byron call the sea? My kingdom expression of freedom. 48 Which poem mourns the death of a friend? On this day I complete my 36th year written before his death. 49 Who was Byron's famous half-sister? Augusta Lee scandalous rumors circulated. 50 Byron's political role in England? House of Lords members spoke against injustice. Now let us explore objective questions on P.B. Shelley. 1 In which year was Shelley born? 1792 Born in Sussex. 2 Who wrote Ode to the West Wind? Shelley written in 1819. 3 Which poem ends with If winter comes, can spring be far behind? Ode to the West Wind most quoted Shelley line. 4 Who wrote to a skylark? Shelley Hail to thee, blithe spirit. 5 Which poem mourns Keats? Adonai's Elegy written in 1821. 6 What is the genre of Prometheus Unbound? Lyrical dramatic poem published in 1820. 7 Who is Asia in Prometheus Unbound? Prometheus's consort symbol of love and enlightenment. 8 Which poem begins Hail to thee, blithe spirit? To a Skylark Shelley's famous opening. 9 What is the theme of Ozymandias? Transience of power inspired by Egyptian ruins. 10 Which poem features the lone and level sands? Ozymandias' image of decay. 11 Which poem has Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought? To a Skylark central Shelley theme. 12 Which essay claims poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world? A Defense of Poetry written 1821-22. 13 Who was Shelley's second wife? Mary Shelley author of Frankenstein. 14 Which Shelley poem is based on a political massacre? The Mask of Anarchy, Peter Le Massacre, 1819. 15. Rise like lions after slumber appears in which work? The Mask of Anarchy, rallying cry for revolution. 16. Which poem features the cloud speaking? The cloud, personification of sky. 17. Shelley drowned in which country? Italy. 1822. Boating accident. 18. What was Shelley's sailing boat called? The Don Juan, named after Byron's poem. 19. Which poem contrasts human sorrow with bird's joy? To a Skylark Sorrow vs Pure Song. 20. Which long poem retells the Prometheus myth? Prometheus Unbound ends in liberation. 21. Who was Shelley's close friend and fellow poet? Byron. Bond formed in Italy. 22. Which poem is a hymn to creative inspiration? Hymn to Intellectual Beauty, 1816 composition. 23. The awful shadow of some unseen power appears in? Hymn to Intellectual Beauty, abstract deity. 24. Which poem addresses the west wind as destroyer and preserver? Ode to the west wind, dual nature of wind. 25. What verse form does the west wind ode use? Terza rima, Dante inspired. 26. Which poem calls the skylark a spirit? To a Skylark avoids calling it a mere bird. 27. What poem celebrates rain and cycles of life? The Cloud, playful scientific imagery. 28. Which political poem Shelley wrote about Ireland? Address to the Irish people, written during activism. 29. What poem condemns monarchy? The Mask of Anarchy, political work. 30. Who was Harriet Westbrook? Shelley's first wife, married 1811. 31. A thing may endure but mutability, which poem? Mutability, theme of change. 32. Which sonnet begins lift not the painted veil? Lift not the painted veil, philosophical sonnet. 33. Which poem features the simile of a cloud drifting in the sky? The Cloud, personified weather. 34. Shelley belonged to which generation? Second generation Romantics, along with Keats and Byron. 35. What poem uses volcanic imagery for revolt? Ode to the west wind, wind scattering ashes. 36. Where is Ozymandias' statue found? Desert of Egypt, source, Diodorus Siculus. 37. What emotion dominates Adonais? Grief and immortality, mourning, Keats. 38. Which poem calls poets hierophants of an unapprehended inspiration? Defense of Poetry, visionary role. 39. Who rescued Shelley's heart from cremation? Edward Trelawney, famous anecdote. 40. Which poem features the trumpet of a prophecy? Ode to the West Wind, fifth canto, climax. 41. Shelley ran away with whom in 1814? Mary Godwin, future Mary Shelley. 42. Which poem describes a splendor in the grass? Wordsworth, not Shelley. Shelley's parallel idea in him. 43. Which poem imagines a spirit of beauty ruling the world? Hymn to Intellectual Beauty, 1816 vow. 44. Which poem uses the metaphor of a lyre? Ode to the West Wind, poet as instrument. 45. Which poem asks the bird, teach me half the gladness? To a Skylark, poet envies joy. 46. Which poem explains nature with playful science? The Cloud, early eco-poetry. 47. Which sonnet mocks British rulers? England in 1819, political critique. 48. Shelley died near which city? Viareggio, cremated on the beach. 49. Who edited Shelley's works after death? Mary Shelley, preserved legacy. 50. Which poem imagines regeneration of society? Prometheus Unbound ends in harmony. Now let us explore objective questions on John Keats. 1. In which year was Keats born? 1795, born in London. 2. Who wrote Ode to a Nightingale? John Keats, composed in spring 1819. 3. Which poem begins my heart aches, and a drowsy numbness pains? Ode to a Nightingale, opening line. 4. What is the theme of Ode on a Grecian Urn? Transience vs permanence, art vs life, contrast. 5. Which poem ends with beauty is truth, truth beauty? Ode on a Grecian urn, famous concluding epigram. 6. Which Keats poem is about autumn's ripeness? To Autumn, written in 1819. 7. Keats belonged to which generation? Second generation Romantics along with Shelley and Byron. 8. Which poem features the beaker full of the warm south? Ode to a Nightingale wine image. 9. What genre is Endymion? Romantic epic poem, 1818 publication. 10. What line opens Endymion? A thing of beauty is a joy forever, most quoted Keats line. 11. Which poem portrays the night enthralled by a mysterious woman? La Belle Dame sans Merci, medieval ballad tone. 12. What form is Bright Star? Sonnet addressed to his beloved. 13. Who was Keats's fiancée? Fanny Brawne, central figure in his late life. 14. Which illness caused Keats's death? Tuberculosis, died in 1821. 15. Where is Keats buried? Rome Protestant Cemetery. 16. Which poem uses the image of full-throat ease? Ode to a Nightingale, Nightingale's effortless song. 17. Which poem describes autumn as a bosom friend of the maturing sun? To Autumn personification. 18. What is Keats's poetic philosophy? Negative capability, embracing uncertainty. 19. Which poem deals with Psyche? Ode to Psyche celebrates inner worship. 20. Who were Keats's early supporters? Leigh Hunt promoted Keats's talent. 21. Which poem shows a night pale and haggard? La Belle Dame sans Merci, ballad of enchantment. 22. Which poem is addressed to a mythic water creature? Lamia, tale of enchantment. 23. Which poem explores doomed love between mortal and immortal? Isabella, or, The Pot of Basil, adapted from Boccaccio. 24. What poem features the line, Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird? Ode to a Nightingale immortality theme. 25. Which long poem presents mythic lovers? Lamia, two-part narrative. 26. Which Keats poem mentions half in love with easeful death? Ode to a Nightingale meditation on mortality. 27. Which poem celebrates the imagination's power? Ode to fancy, early work. 28. Which critic attacked Keats? John Wilson, Croker Quarterly Review. 29. Who said reviewers killed Keats? Shelley in Adonais. 30. Which poem includes the phrase magic casements? Ode to a Nightingale romantic yearning. 31. Keats was trained in what profession? Medicine/apothecary, qualified in 1816. 32. Which poem is written on the consumption of literature? On first looking into Chapman's Homer Petrarchan sonnet. 33. Which poem ends with No, no, go not to Lethe? Ode on melancholy rejects escape. 34. What does Keats call autumn in his ode? Close bosom friend of the sun, opening line imagery. 35. Who was Keats's close friend and roommate? Charles Brown supported him in Hampstead. 36. Which poem explores the pain of delight? Ode on melancholy contrasts joy and sorrow. 37. Which sonnet celebrates reading Homer? On first looking into Chapman's Homer sense of discovery. 38. Where did Keats write most odes? Hampstead during ode year 1819. 39. Which poem calls beauty a joy forever? Endymion, opening line. 40. Which poem shows luxuriant sensuous imagery? The Eve of St. Agnes, romantic romance. 41. Who was Keats's brother he cared for? Tom Keats died of TB. 42. Where did Keats travel to improve health? Italy, final journey. 43. Keats's letters are known for intense literary criticism, major romantic prose. 44. Which poem opens with a cold imagery setting? The Eve of St. Agnes, bitter chill it was. 45. Which poem describes a seduction through vision? Lamia, Lamia's enchantment. 46. Which poem has themes of aging and death? Ode to a Nightingale, voice of mortality. 47. Which poem cites joy's grape? Ode on melancholy mythic imagery. 48. Which poem focuses on imagination's temple? Ode to Psyche, internal shrine. 49. Which poem frames life as fleeting? Ode on a Grecian urn, stillness vs movement. 50 Keats's poetic ideal. Sensuous beauty, core of romantic aesthetic. Now let us explore objective questions on William Blake. 1. In which year was Blake born? 1757, born in London. 2. Who wrote Songs of Innocence and Experience? William Blake, published 1794. 3. Which poem begins Tiger, tiger, burning bright? The Tiger, most famous Blake poem. 4. Which poem contrasts innocence and poverty? The Chimney Sweeper, from both Innocence and Experience. 5. Which poem shows a lamb as a divine symbol? The Lamb, from Innocence. 6. What is the theme of London? Social oppression, industrial era critique. 7. Blake belonged to which movement? Pre-romantic/romantic, forerunner, visionary poet. 8. Which poem includes marks of weakness, marks of woe? London, opening line. 9. Which book was engraved with Blake's method? Illuminated books, hand-colored prints. 10. Who was Blake's wife? Catherine Blake assisted his printing. 11. Which poem examines duality of creation? The Tiger, fearful symmetry. 12. Which poem praises divine innocence? The Lamb, pastoral imagery. 13. Which longer work contains prophetic visions? The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, satirical and mystical. 14. Who said, I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's? Blake, radical visionary. 15. Blake worked primarily in what trade? Engraving, trained as an apprentice. 16. Which poem depicts children being freed by an angel? The Chimney Sweeper, Innocence, dream of liberation. 17. Which mythic figure is Blake's creative genius? Los embodies imagination. 18. Which poem contains mind-forged monocles? London, symbol of social restriction. 19. Which work is a satire against conventional morality? The Marriage of Heaven and Hell flips good/evil. 20. Which poem compares innocence and harsh reality? Holy Thursday, two contrasting versions. 21. Which figure represents reason? Urizen, restrictive rationality. 22. Which poem ends with God bless thee? The Lamb, childlike blessing. 23. Which poem questions the Creator's power? The Tiger, did he who made the Lamb make thee? 24. Which book features Blake's visions of prophets? Jerusalem, epic prophetic poem. 25. What technique did Blake invent? Relief etching, used for his illuminated books. 26. Who supported Blake's career as a patron? William Haley, early employer. 27. Which poem condemns child labor? The Chimney Sweeper, social critique. 28. Which Blake work critiques organized religion? The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, anti-authoritarian. 29. Who recorded Blake's later years? Alexander Gilchrist, first biographer. 30. Which poem describes a bleak urban landscape? London, chartered streets and Thames. 31. Which mythic cycle contains Orc? Prophetic book, symbol of rebellion. 32. Which poem celebrates innocence of childhood? Infant joy, from Innocence. 33. Which poem shows corrupted innocence? Infant sorrow, from Experience. 34. Which poem contrasts social joy and institutional cruelty? Holy Thursday, Experience, critique of charity. 35. Which illustrated book includes Proverbs of Hell? The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, famous aphorisms. 36. Blake saw visions of what as a child? Angels, claimed lifelong visions. 37. Where did Blake live most of his life? London, rarely traveled. 38. Which poem depicts valley of delight and sorrow? The Divine Image, human virtues. 39. Which poem presents distorted virtues? The human abstract opposite of divine image. 40. Who was Blake's mentor in art? James Basire sent Blake to copy tombs. 41. Which poem displays angelic innocence? The Little Boy Lost, from Innocence. 42. Which poem is its counterpart showing danger? The Little Boy Found Safe Return. 43. Which long poem concerns the giant Albion? Jerusalem, national myth. 44 Which character is Blake's embodiment of poetic inspiration? Los creative fire. 45 Which character opposes Los as oppressive order? Urizen represents law and reason. 46 Which poem includes the fearful hand? The tiger image of divine forge. 47 Which poem calls God a kindly father? The Lamb Gospel tone. 48 Which poem shows the fall of human virtues? The human abstract experience counterpart. 49 Which illuminated book blends politics and mythology? America, a prophecy revolutionary imagery. 50 Where is Blake buried? Bunhill Fields London Cemetery for Dissenters.